Among the Misbegotten. I walk each autumn toward a question mark. No guru leads me, no lama guides my sullen stride down that dark, foreshortened track of time. No pattern brings my life to resolution or success. Only the fluent figure that abides wherever I may gaze with ruthless care. For 60 years and more, such is my dare. I picture nubile bodies bent to lust over an aching frame, the body younger than the head and hands, the thrust of aching loins and all that baited hunger that lunges to return. And so it must if it cannot be sated, or even if it is. This tragedy repeats what woman wants, for she alone my grave desire haunts. No matter what ripe state of grief or rage I may invite, I cannot erase one atom of desire, one particle of age. For all those daughters of the fabled swan inflame me and evade me, sweet escape, or just another tremor coming on, another instant when my heart goes wild and recollects the ardor of a child. The image that I seek with lustful eyes is pornographic like a Krishna nude. The idle peach, swollen and slit, a spume of fast dissolving nectar, and rude as it may sound, the ripe hormonal fume that comes without pretending. No lies and no compromise on pleasure, if only compassion knew its measure. The shape of youth is guileless, beyond what hope or handle might be set on it. But for my generation betrayed, the bond of sex and pleasure was never unmade and never fastened either. So I am fond of oral adoration, of orgasm relayed. At 60 so, a single trepidation tempers my waning rigor like a blade. Plato mistook the transit of desire and missed the tender node where it must flare. No ancient or modern principle of fire delivers on the promise of my care, which is the care supreme, the tantra of the idle peach, anonymous, divine, the ravishing delight of slit and tip, the flambant pressure on the crown, the lip. All faithful lovers and the many traitors are fed by the same flame, but nourished so diversely, and all those maidens who took me into arms and flourished on my bright affection, but for an instant knew the man I was and am, beladen by excess, yet compassed in those eyes without withholding, without defense or lies. The only presence I can stand is naked as the wind, and temporal, the tree that dances in it. Stripped of all inhibition, solitary, free, and undefined. But at midnight and the dawn alike, this desolation does not let me go. And how long it will hold me, who can know? In one despairing look, I bind a misbegotten race to its desire denied. The sacred dance, a hustle, the dancer certified. Greetings again to each and all. This is John Lash, the Main Turton, recording on the 24th of July, 2015. I speak to all of you who can stand to listen, and especially to those of you who can stand with the truth when you hear it. To open this little exposition of mine, I wish I could call it a conversation, but there's nobody here right now. To open this little exposition of my recorded voice, I read a poem from the Yeats Conversions, which is called Among the Misbegotten. And it's a conversion of probably one of the 5 best-known poems of William Butler Yeats, which was called Among School Children. So in this poem, I won't provide you with a commentary. I wouldn't dare to exceed the mere imposture of reading it to you by commenting at length upon it. But I will just point out that the misbegotten refers to my generation of the 60s. So there is a lot of sexual content in this poem. And it's a poem of despair, in a certain way, you could say. I've pointed out before something that I will in the future be bringing more and more to the front now that I am out of time. I've said, I've explained that the Yeats conversions came about in the wake of the mania, the divine mania of 2008, after I received the terma of Gaia awakening. There was such a turbulent, erotic, and mythopoetic surge running through me and around me that I merely danced inside the flame of it to stay alive. And I had to get things out of my system. This is how I am. I'm a beast that has to get things out of his system. And so the first wave came, Refuge for the Unborn, the first series of Yeats conversions. As I've explained, it happened quite spontaneously. I have a volume of the collected poems of W.B. Yeats spanning over, I think, something like more than 40 years. And I would simply, and I know these poems, many of them by heart, since I was 14 years old. I hadn't reviewed them. I hadn't gone back to Yeats for many, many years. I immediately went back to Yeats in the mania of 2008. That would be a mere 7 years ago, my friends. And I took the book and put it on the table and opened it. I read a poem like Sailing to Byzantium, or Among School Children, or The Song of the Wandering Aengus. And then I wrote the conversion of the poem, most often without knowing how the line I began to write would end. So the first series came out like that, and many of the poems in that series were dedicated to Jeanne, who was my Shakti OTM, my Shakti of the moment, when I received the terma of Gaia awakening, and goddess blessed she be. And then, to my surprise, there was more to come, more to unload. So I produced the second volume called Tantra Outbound. Among the Misbegotten is in the second volume of the Yeats conversions, which contains longer poems, some quite long and complicated poems. And in each case, if you ever get around to looking at this material, you'll find that the cadences, the accentuation of the lines, the length of the lines, the rhyme schemes, and even to a certain extent, the themes of the poems are reflected and restated in the conversions. That's why I call them conversions. They're still the Yeats poems. They've just been converted. And the point I want to make here, without becoming too self-indulgent, I'll get back to that point in a moment, is that I did receive Kala Tantra along with Planetary Tantra. From the very beginning, it came in the zip packet of the terma. I didn't know what to do with Kala Tantra. I didn't have the opportunity to practice Kala Tantra, to test it out, because I didn't have a consort. And I didn't find a suitable consort for Kala Tantra. until January of 2015. I had to wait almost 7 years. And so, in my frustration, in my exasperation, I poured the instructions of Kala Tantra into these poems, and particularly into the footnotes and commentaries that go with the poems. And so I can say to you today that there is one place on this planet, that there is one resource where you can find the fundamental teachings of Kala Tantra, and that is coded into the poetry of the Yeats conversions and explicitly revealed in the commentaries and footnotes on those poems. And some of them are on Kali Rising. Well, I'll do my best to get them all on Kali Rising and get them organized so they're accessible, and also to post MP3 files of readings of the poems, and at the same time, in the cases where it's possible, I would post links to the original poems as William Butler Yeats himself read them. And then those of you who are so inclined to go there can go there. Now the title of this talk, and this is going to be a strange one. I warn you, I'm going to ramble and wander and meander among a number of different themes. But I'll keep my point clear. I'll keep my point sharp, okay? Purpose of this talk is to explain that I am out of time and what I'm going to do about it. And at the end of this talk, I want those of you who follow who follow Gaiaspora.org, who are on the mailing list, those of you who support me through PayPal, I want you to know that you are invaluable to me, and that I couldn't be here alive on this day saying what I'm saying now in the way I'm saying it if you hadn't been there, if I didn't know that you were there. And it doesn't matter if there's only 50 of you or 150, which is about what I suspect. Never ever go away from this talk thinking that you are not enough. That is not the case. I am simply out of time delivering the Sophianic message in the way that I've been delivering it to you since I began the Gaian Navigation Experiment. It's a matter of style and delivery. You know, these matters are of paramount concern to a Turton. I want to make it absolutely clear to you that when I cease to do these recordings soon, I feel for you, believe me, I do. And I don't want to leave you in the lurch. And I don't want to leave you in limbo. I don't want to leave you at all. But I cannot continue in this manner. I am out of time for this particular method of getting out to the world. So it's not that you're not enough. It's just that something has changed for me in the intimate dynamics of what I do, what I say, how I teach, etc. All right then, so here it comes. I'm going to start by asking you all a question. A trick question, of course, but what else would you expect from me? And the question is, hey, do you have time to watch a movie that lasts 2 hours, 12 minutes, and 25 seconds? Would you like to do that? Would you like to sit down in front of your computer screen, you don't have to go to the theater, and watch a movie that lasts 2 hours and 12 minutes and 25 seconds? Do you have 2 hours, 12 minutes, and 25 seconds to watch a movie? Or are you out of time? Like me? Well, If you have, or think you have, that much time to watch a movie, then I propose that you go to YouTube and in the search bar, you put in the name of the movie, and guess what that is? Out of Time. Now, this is a film from 2003, and the stars are Denzel Washington, who's black, and Eva Mendes, who's a Latina, and then this absolutely glorious chocolate caramel woman whose name escapes me. These are the three principal actors. And it's a thriller, kind of crime thriller. And why do I propose that you watch this movie if you have time? Well, because there's a particular quality about this movie. Well, it's a good movie, and well done, well acted, well scripted. And there's a particular quality about this movie that makes it very riveting. And what that is known in dramatic or screenwriting terms as the pace of the plot. The pace of the plot is very, very rapid. And in fact, I can only think of one other movie that comes to mind in that respect. There's a film called No Way Out, starring Kevin Costner. That film came out in 1987. And No Way Out, which could also be a title for this talk, and Out of Time are similar in that respect. The pace of the film is very rapid, and in both cases, the story arc depends on a particular device, which could be described as the discovery of the action of the protagonist. So in both films, the male protagonist has done something, and events are catching up with him. People are discovering things, facts. They are making investigations and drawing conclusions that lead them to catch up with him so that he would be, as it were, what's the word? What do you do to an alleged suspect? Apprehended. He would be caught. And the pace of the film, in both cases, is very fast and very well scripted because the protagonist manages to stay mere seconds ahead of the event or the disclosure, which would result in his ultimate apprehension and in his being, his actions being revealed. I have to say that Out of Time in particular, and I did have time to watch Out of Time, paradoxically, but you see the use to which I am putting that time now. I have to say that in particular, I really related to what was happening to the Denzel Washington character in Out of Time. Oh, yeah. It's sort of like it illustrates his situation in the film sort of illustrates my situation. See, the way that I'm living is at a very, very fast pace. And I am just one step ahead, one act ahead of being discovered. But not in the sense that the character in Out of Time was discovered. He didn't want to be discovered. I do want to be discovered. And I am just, the world is just catching up with me. I am in 1 day, 1 hour, 1 minute more. And it's going to discover me. But is it going to discover me while I'm still here or not? This is the big question in my mind. And I'm out of time about wondering about that question. Do you get that? I am out of time for wondering if the world is going to catch up with me or not. So in face of this situation, I am changing my behavior, and I'm changing my modus operandi, my MO. And I'm here to tell you about it, all about it, in this talk. Here I am at the 20-minute mark And I think I'll take maybe 5 or 10 minutes to elaborate a point that relates closely to the parable of the extras. The film, Out of Time, like every other film that's ever been made, has a setting. It has a location. And certainly, before the film was made, a crew went to that part of the world and scouted the location. And then the production crew, and everyone involved in making such decisions, decided that the film would be shot in the Florida Keys. And so, there it is. You see the setting, and it's quite an intriguing and attractive setting. Who wouldn't want to be transplanted into some small town of maybe, say, 4,000 to 5,000 people in the Florida Keys, with all that water and the boats and the docks and the inlets and the seaside restaurants with seafood and the sea breeze? Who wouldn't want to magically teleport down to one of the Florida Keys and just walk around and, mingle with people and look at the scene? Meet the locals in the Florida Keys, right? Florida Keys is the setting for Out of Time. The location of the shoot. Now just imagine that the story, the narrative of Out of Time, is a true story. It's not a film. It's a true story that happened in the Florida Keys, in this particular place, which is Key something. I can't remember. And as you watch the film, it's riveting. This is a point I want to make. The film is riveting. And so you watch it intensely. You do not take your attention away. It engages your attention in a riveting manner. So the story unfolds about the local policeman, played by Denzel Washington, his ex-wife-to-be, played by Eva Mendes, and the other characters. And as you watch the film, and as you see the characters interacting, and the action unfold, it's easy to imagine that you could be in this little town. You could be in the setting of the film. And it's easy to imagine that there are many, many, many other stories in this little town of 2,000 or 3,000 people in the Florida Keys. For instance, there's a seafood restaurant, which is an incidental scene for an incidental setting in a number of scenes. And there are extras in the seafood restaurant, of course. But in real life, each of these extras also has a story. And it's easy to let your imagination run as you watch Out of Time, whether or not you know you're out of time. Well, put your imagination to this exercise. It's easy to say, oh, look, there's a seafood restaurant, and oh, I see over there in the background there's a garage. Every small town has one or two local garages. And the old man who owns the garage has been there for many years, and there's an upper story of the garage, and actually an apartment, and yeah, there's a young kid that lives up there. Yeah, his name, what is his name? Yeah, his name is it's Dean. Remember that young kid? He came to the town some years ago, and he was kind of lost, and people were suspicious of him. They didn't know who he was, and gradually the town kind of adopted him. Well, he got a job at the garage, and now he's living above the garage, and he actually has a girlfriend. Remember when she showed up? Donna and Dean, everybody knows them now, And Donna came down to the Key to visit a relative, and they met and kind of, fell in love the first moment they met. They were standing on the dock there, and now you can see them sailing out in the bay, and she's going to school to learn botany. Isn't that fantastic? She's not always there because she has to go to learn botany. And she's a good friend with the bartender, who is the woman in the scene of the confrontation between Denzel Washington and the white male counterpart, who is the husband of the caramel chocolate flavored animal that Denzel Washington is plugging and pounding. And so everyone's lives touch each other's lives. It's a web of lives in this little town in the Florida Keys. And how many stories do you want? How much time do you have? How many stories about the people in this town do you want me to tell you? I dare you to sit there for 10 hours, and I can tell you for 10 hours without stopping stories about the people in this town. And do you have time to hear those stories? And I guarantee you something else. If you can stand to listen, because I'm a pretty good storyteller, I have something that you might call narrative power, which can be read in the Zodiac. And if you can stand to listen to these stories, I guarantee you, you're going to find that every single one of these stories, from the story in the film of the local cop, to the story of Dean and Donna, to the story of the old man who owns the garage, and his son, who was in the Vietnam War, who is now in a home in the town being taken care of because of PTSD. I can tell you all those stories, and every single one of them will be riveting. It will rivet you, and it will engage and consume your attention and your emotion. Now let's return to the setting. The film begins, as many films do, with an establishing shot. It's called an establishing shot. So you establish, sometimes the camera comes down, First you see an overview, like the camera's high. It's on a crane, like a cherry picker. The camera's high. You see an overview of the docks, the water, maybe the quay, the beach in the distance. And then it comes down. The camera sees the main character walking down the street of this small town in the Florida Keys. The story of Out of Time has a setting. The setting is the Florida Keys. But where is the setting set? Well, the setting is set in Florida. Well, where is Florida set? Well, Florida is like a peninsular state of the United States. It extends into the Atlantic Ocean, and on one side is the Gulf of Mexico. But where is the Atlantic Ocean and the Gulf of Mexico? Well, they are vast bodies of water located on what? Oh, yeah, now I remember. They're located on a planet. So whether the story be set in the Florida Keys, in the back streets of Tokyo, in Banff, Canada, whether it be in Friendship, Maine, or Penzance, whether it be in Paris, whether it be in Sardinia, in Syria, in the mountains of Persia, any stories set in these locales are all set in the ultimate location of the earth. Simple fact. It's not extravagant. I'm not inventing or elaborating or fabulating, am I? It's a simple fact. To those, it's a fact to those who can bring their mind to the frame of conception that allows them to place all of human activity upon a planet. Some people will never get that far. But to those who can get that far, what I just stated is obvious, right? Self-evident, right? Okay, hold that thought for a second. And as you're holding that thought, I want to tell you the name of the old man who runs the garage. His name is Ed. Everyone calls him Ed, Oh, silver-haired old guy. Very amiable, very trustworthy. Never cheated anyone in his entire life. Done a lot of work on my car. And Ed is the longtime husband of Grace Hilburn. They're the Hilburns. And Grace is the postmistress of the town. Everybody knows Grace. So the Vietnam vet who suffered from a terrible breakdown of PTSD and exposure to Agent Orange is the son of Ed and Grace. Everyone knows this. And of course, everyone knows that, Grace, the postmistress, is Grace Hilburn, right? Is kind of a busybody, obviously has her nose in everyone's business. And so happens, being the way she is, that Grace followed very closely the drama that happened between that police officer and his Latino wife. Well, they were going to split up. They had been a power couple, a powerful, beautiful couple, and for one reason or another, they were going to split up. And, well, it turned out that the big drama that the policeman went through brought them back together. So Grace knew firsthand the story, the plot of Out of Time. She knew it. She followed it like she follows pretty much most of the unusual events in town. And that story is the story of a reconciliation of lovers. And Grace was so moved by that story, by hearing about how the police officer and his Latino wife got back together, an interracial romance, that she was compelled to call her daughter-in-law, Caroline, who lives in Sacramento, quite a ways on the other coast of the United States, And of course, most people who know the Hilburns know why Caroline is living in Sacramento. Well, she was married to the son of Ed and Grace, the young Vietnam vet who, he was young at the time, he was only 18 when he was in Vietnam, whose life has been shattered. He remains unnamed at this point in the story, but pretty much can picture who this guy is. And his wife, Caroline, left him. They had one child, and then she remarried, and so she has another child from a different father, and they're all living in Sacramento. Well, Grace, the mother-in-law, the mother of the wounded Vietnam vet, whose life has been destroyed, was compelled by the beauty of this story of reconciliation of lovers to call Caroline and enter into a series of conversations with her to try to get her to come with her two children and to reconcile with the Hilburn's son. And this was not an easy thing to do because Caroline initially was not disposed to this conversation. And in fact, Grace was so keen on bringing about this reconciliation between her son and his estranged wife that she asked Dean and Donna to show her how to use Skype, So there she is. You picture her sitting up there in the garage apartment above Ed's place. And Dean and Donna are helping her just with the elementary functions of Skype. And she's starting to Skype with her daughter, Caroline. Now, Caroline really resisted coming back to the Key and to the small town and seeing her husband again, her estranged husband. After all, now she has another child by another man. And Caroline was really not persuaded by her mother's appeals, even though they talked a good number of times on Skype, until one day, it was a weekend actually, Caroline took off with her two children and they went to San Francisco. And they decided that while they were there, they would go to a planetarium. But there is no planetarium in the town of San Francisco, as far as I know. But for some reason, maybe because the children were insistent, that's why. The children were insistent. Mommy, Mommy, we want to go to a planetarium. And so Caroline researched it a little, and she found out there's a famous planetarium in Los Angeles. So they had a little more time for their vacation. So they went down to L.A., and they went to the planetarium in the Griffith Observatory. And they sat there in that dark, domed auditorium, and with the seats leaning back, and they watched the panorama of the sky, and they heard the commentary, the narrative that goes along with the description of the solar system and the constellations and the Milky Way. And for some reason which Caroline herself couldn't explain, when she came out of that auditorium and out of the darkness, she was shaking with tears. She was trembling. And she had to go and stand over in a corner of the entry lounge, kind of leaning against the wall. Well, there was an attendant in the entry lounge who had actually taken her ticket, saw her, a young man in his 20s who lived in L.A., down on Sycamore Avenue, actually, near the Yamashiro restaurant. And he was concerned, naturally, as woman was crying, and he just went over and asked her if she was okay, and they had a little brief exchange. They looked into each other's eyes, and it was one of those incidents that happens between total strangers when the attendant and this woman, who was broken open by some unnamed emotion, really saw each other as human animals at that moment. There was something transpired between them. And later on that day, when the attendant got home to his apartment, he found an abandoned kitten on the doorstep. And that kitten became a great ally and companion to him for many years of his life. Well, Caroline and her children went home to Sacramento, and eventually they did go and see her husband, her estranged husband, her ex-husband, because she divorced him. And so there was a closure, and there was a story of success in love, a story of reconciliation of lovers that Grace and Ed Hilborn were able to enjoy, and everyone in the town who knew about it, which was similar to the reconciliation of the two lovers in the story Out of Time. And all of that took place, well, in a number of settings, didn't it? It took place in the Florida Keys, Sacramento, California, San Francisco, L.A. Some scenes of that story even took place in Vietnam, because you'd have to go back to Vietnam when the young man, the son of Ed and Grace, was 18, and know what happened to him there that so broke and shattered his spirit and his mind. And all these settings have one thing in common, don't they? You know what that is, don't you? All these locales for these stories fit into one supreme locale, which is the planet Earth. And I could go on for 10 hours. You can see I could. I'm not bragging. I could go on for 10 hours without stopping telling you these stories, and each one of them would be riveting to you. I would have your total attention. The stories and the incidents and the characters would evoke empathy in you and identification, and you wouldn't be able to tear yourself away from these stories. And yet, would you be able to realize that what all these stories have in common is that none of them incorporates the ultimate location of the planet into the story? Now you could say that Caroline got a hint of the ultimate location of her story with the young man she loved who went to Vietnam, the father of her older child. You could say that Carolyn got a hint, a nudge, a clue from the universe when she went into that dark astronomical dome. And she saw the stars and the constellations and the planets, and maybe, even though they didn't say so, maybe, even though they didn't say so in the commentary, in the narrative, something in the back of her mind prompted her, like a source prompt in her mind. And subliminally she realized that the setting of Vietnam, the town in the Florida Keys, the town where she lives, Sacramento, California, and all the settings of all these stories all have one setting in common, and that is the earth. But the stories do not include the earth in the narrative, do they? So what does it mean to be out of time? I'll tell you that I am out of time, and have been out of time already, to give my attention to any story that does not involve the ultimate setting of that story, and recognize it is the planet, and recognize that the planet is alive, and that the characters in the story are actually fictional characters in the imagination of the planet itself. I'm out of time for any life story that is not plotted in that way. I'm out of time for extras and extraneous stories. And maybe so are you. You need to consider that maybe so are you. And as riveting as the stories may be, due to the human content, due to what you learn about the human condition, there is a danger that these stories, the lives of the extras, could consume your attention and consume your emotions, and could demand so much involvement from you that you do not engage yourself in the principal story. The principle is the story is the same for all actors, and there are no extras in the plot of that story. That is the moral of the parable of the extras. In concluding my talks that began with the magnificent experiment of the GNE, and then morphed into Gaiaspora.org and the newsletters, the news flashes, and all of that. In completing these talks, I want to make absolutely certain that you have a crystal clear comprehension of what I've told you, what I've taught you, and what I've given you. Of course, I've taught you many things, but there is one particular lesson that I have taught you that I want to see you keep in the focus of your mind all the time. I taught you that just as you are an animal, a member of a species, a biological creature born from the earth that is your mother, you are equally a biographical entity in the dreaming of the mother. You have the existence of an animal, physical, alive, in the habitat of the planet. And wherever you live in the planet, in that habitat, whether it be a city or a country, in the town by the ocean or in the desert, the same fact holds for all of you. that you, as a physical creature, are born out of the planetary animal mother. And just as she gives you a physical existence, she also gives you a fictional existence. You are a character in her dreaming. You and I are characters in her dreaming, equally as we are creatures in the biological habitat she provides. Now, as a creature, you can interact with that habitat in many ways. You can go live in the city where you have minimal interaction with the natural habitat of which you are born, and you can choose, if you wish, to interact merely with a human-made setting, a human-made stage setting where you live in the city. Or if you choose to go to the country, and I strongly advise that the exodus begin, then you can at least live in closer contact with the natural world from which you're born. But being an animal in the habitat of the earth is only part of your relation to the earth. The more intimate relation is a power-sharing arrangement between you, the fictional character that you are, and the goddess who dreams you, the author of your story, the source of your biographical identity. How do you come to know that? How do you come to act on that knowledge? Once you receive what I've taught you about being a fictional character in her dreaming, then you consider how to act your role as such, how to be an actor in her dreaming. There are no extras in her dreaming. The extras are a write-off. It may as well be as if they never existed. And if you think that you can go out into the world on any day and hang out with extras, once you have taken this lesson to heart, you are very, very, very mistaken. As the female actress tells Miranda in the parable of the extras, young woman, the code of narration says that if you see and know and accept a story, that the setting of all narratives is the earth, then you are obliged, you are responsible to uphold that realization. And you are obliged to uphold it entirely. Entirely. With all of your life and in every moment of your life. Because once you come into the filmmaking process, and you're an actor and collaborator, you are in another life, and there is no going back. You might visit briefly the world of the extras. You might go back to pick up your socks, but that's about it. So that's what I've taught you. Go away with that, and go away also with a clear knowledge of what I've given you. A while ago, as I was preparing my professional website, which is still not out of the preparation stage, it's not up and running, it became clear to me that I ought to say what I actually am, because it's very problematical to have so many roles. I'm the Turton, I'm the Nahual of Infinity Ridge, I'm the teacher of Naked Eye Astronomy, I'm the author of Not in His Image, I'm the navigator, I'm this, I'm that, I'm the Kalika, I'm the nominal head of the Kalika War Party, I'm the Kalika teacher of sex magic. What am I? What am I? It doesn't fly professionally, people can't follow what I am. So I decided that I would come out in my professional website with a little recorded message, and I would say that I wish to be recognized as the mythologist, as another role, who restored the fallen goddess scenario from the surviving Gnostic materials. I wish to be recognized by the world for that accomplishment and for that role. And I do. And I would be extremely happy if the world catches up with me and gives me that recognition. Why? Because of my ego? No. Because of what I could do and how I could leverage the power that I would acquire from having that reputation in the minds of a fair number of people in the tonal, in the ordinary world. I would leverage that power into something of benefit for you. Those of you who are in the story as actors and not extras. But between you and I, or you and me, no, I like you and I better. I don't say we anymore, you notice that. Between you and I, there's a second thing, a second accomplishment that I want to be known for among you who are my allies and accomplices. I was sitting in a cafe one evening with a calico woman of my acquaintance. This is the second woman I have met in my life so far with whom I can develop the calico instructions, including the technique of sexual magic. And we're sitting in a cafe in the north of Spain on a warm spring evening. And I said to her, you know, I realized today, because I was with a group of students in this planetary tantra retreat, and I had the recognition in their eyes upon me, and the love and the admiration, which I reflected back to them in my eyes. I realized in that wonderful ambience of recognition that I am the man who created and wrote the operating code for human imagination. The DOS, the Data Operating System, or simply the OS. I created and wrote the OS for operating human imagination. And I teach it. I taught it in the Gaian Navigation Experiment. I teach how to use human imagination. It's not divine imagination, remember. In the correct way. I teach people how to use their intelligence in the best possible way, and additionally, the correct use of imagination. And you know what that is, don't you? Let in all thine operations be guided by nature, and perform thine operations using the true and not the fantastic imagination. So before I could offer to you the DOS of human imagination, I had to lay down that fundamental rule, which is the alchemical principle, that there are many wrong ways. What does this alchemical principle tell you? There are many wrong, erroneous, misleading, distracting, destructive, and delusional, and harmful ways to use the power of human imagination. Many. But there is only one correct way to use the power of human imagination. And that is to use it in a co-creative act with the dreaming of the planet Earth. And this is what I teach. And is the world at large ever going to catch up with me? They're ever going to catch up with the Turton? Or am I going to be 1 minute or 10 seconds or 1 second ahead of that? I don't know. But what I do know is that the odds in the future will be different than what they have been so far. What is changing the odds is my action. Remember, I am a dealer in Kali's casino. And I can say, these are the odds. I can change the odds. I can manipulate the odds. And this is what I'm going to do. I am now in the process of changing the odds of my own chances of having a different kind of recognition and operating in a different MO regarding how I deliver the Sophianic message. And you are there at the moment this change occurs. You are my witnesses. And so, having said all that, if you're still with me, if you can still stand to listen, I think I can say with confidence that you would understand that it's become self-indulgent to do this. There were passages and moments in the guided navigation experiment that were purely self-indulgent. You know, Don Juan warned Carlos way back in the days of those tales and legends of shamanism that indulgence is a pitfall and a trap of the man of knowledge or the sorcerer. And I've fallen into that trap many times, and you've seen me go head down into it and crawled out again. But I'm out of time for any kind of indulgence or self-indulgence. After I finished the GNE, I didn't know where to go. I believe that if you look back, look over the news letters and the news flashes with some detachment and distance, if you consider them with some compassion for the teacher, you'll find that I was fumbling and stumbling along, struggling with the feeling that the delivery of that material, as valuable as it may be to you, I'm not discounting its value, constituted an act of self-indulgence for me, and I'm out of time for self-indulgence of any kind. So, in the remaining, 10-15 minutes of this talk, I'll tell you what's coming next and what I'm doing now. It does involve you deeply. And it involves correction, the event of correction, and the concept of correction. Now, as the sole individual mythologist, comparative mythologist, and self-educated scholar of ancient materials, who pulled together the fallen goddess scenario, I found myself in a position way back when I was in association with the people of the Marian Institute of considering what correction is, you know. I remember having conversations back in Marian with certain people during the time that the Marian Institute sponsored metahistory.org. The relationship ended abruptly in July of 2009. I remember some of the closer colleagues in that setting, Buzzards Bay, asking me, John, well, what do you say about correction, man? You know, you've pointed out in your reconstruction of the FGS, Sophianic narrative, that the word correction appears, 2 or 3 times in the Coptic materials of Nag Hammadi, once in the Valentinian exposition, once again in the Origin of the World, I think, and perhaps a 3rd time. Phew, that's a slim clue, but it's a big, big, big theme. Oh yeah, it's as big as it gets. And I was hesitant to say anything about correction. Then the events of the spring of 2011 overtook me, and I came out boldly, I may say, proposing that there would be a 3-year process of reset during which the Aeons of Fire would initiate her correction, and that she would correct the experiment immediately following the 3 years of reset, March 2011 to March 2014. So technically speaking, we're now in correction. What I've done is I added the concept of correction, according to my extrapolation, to the Sophianic narrative. And now you and I are living the Sophianic narrative as it unfolds. It's an open-ended myth. It's an open-ended film, like the auteur tells Miranda. He hasn't written the last half of the film. And Miranda, young woman, if you want to be in that film, I'll write you in. I've written you all in to correction. You wrote it with me. Couldn't have written it by myself. I would have gone insane trying to maintain such an immense orchestration of human imagination on my own, and even with the support of my 2 cats, I would have gone blazing bonkers without you. So together, like the collaborators and filmmakers working with the writer-director in the parable of the extras, you and I, not we, you and I, babes and brothers, sisters, daughters, lovers, hetaira, pulled together to elaborate this myth and to elaborate the theme of correction so that it's something to be lived and something to make a difference in the world. Well, all that is pretty juicy. All that is pretty lovely. All that is truly magnificent. But I have to tell you that I made some errors in what I taught you about correction. And now I need to correct my teaching on correction. I'm not going to go into an elaborate discourse about it. I'm going to give you the brutal edge of this correction on my part. I misled you all, and I misled myself. I've never been through this before, okay? Humanity has never been through this before. It's never been living in the moment of Sophia's correction. I misled you by leading you to believe or assume or hope or anticipate that Sophia's correction would make any difference in the world at large, in the world of the extras. I can tell you brutally right now that I have come to realize, maybe I'm wrong and you can disagree. We can agree to disagree. But it's too late to correct the world drama. It's gone beyond the scale of correction, and it has to play out to its final, terminal, self-destructive insanity. Everything has to play out to its terminal insanity and annihilation. The vaccinations, the media lies, the political corruption, the crimes of the humans, the agenda of humanity, the war machine, the military-industrial complex, the media academic complex with all of its lies, the agenda of cultural Marxism, the insanity of Christianity and of Zionist Christianity. I could go on for a half an hour. All of it has gone too far to be corrected. And it doesn't matter how many people wake up. It's not about the awakening of consciousness. It's about the implementation of conscience. It doesn't matter how many people wake up to the fact of what the Rothschild banking mafia actually is, if someone is not willing to go out and take them out. And I don't see anybody doing that, quite honestly, if they're not in the Calico War Party. And what is the Calico War Party? Calico War Party is nothing but a blueprint. It's like the drawing of a boat, of a beautiful schooner, in which some people will take a journey, but it's just the drawing. It's just a draft, blueprint of a boat. So how exactly did I mislead you, and how did I mislead myself in what I taught about correction? Quite simply, I created in you the anticipation that Sapphire's correction would manifest as an event on the planetary scale. It is a planetary event, but I led you to believe it's a planetary event that would manifest in the scale of the social drama, so that the proof of correction could be seen in a radical turnaround of the state of affairs in the world today, namely of the social order, with its lies and its corruption, its cruelty and perversity, its insanity, and its totally toxic, self-annihilating behaviors. Well, that's not the case. I can tell you right now that I can advise you, don't wait a second longer. You're out of time for expecting that Sapphire's correction is going to make a difference in the world at large. Sapphire's correction is an event of the planet for the planet. Sapphire's correction has been accomplished on her terms. It was accomplished with the establishment of the pleromic relay manifested by the celestial anchor in September of 2012, right? She is realigned with the galactic core. She is reconnected and working in tandem with her consort, Telete. That is the correction. It is her event in her life as a planet. When I said that she would reset the divine experiment so that we could expect to see changes in the world that we live in, I was misleading you. We are the primary subjects of the divine experiment. There I said we for the last time. You and I, in the solidarity of the anthropos, in that look, not we, but only those in that look passed from one to the other, claim our role in the divine experiment, and only you and I can correct it. And that is exactly what I'm going to do now. And I'll tell you how I'm going to do it. I'm going to proceed with no anticipation whatsoever that Sapphire's correction makes a difference in the world at large. Rather, I proceed with the anticipation that Sapphire's correction makes a difference in my life alone. The fate of the Kalpa turns on one life at a time. And I not only anticipate her correction to make a difference in my life alone, selfishly and personally, but I intend to act in such a way, to choose a course of action and behavior to demonstrate that change, to demonstrate her correction by the way I live and what I do, and frack everything else. I don't care about the world at large. I don't care about the psychodrama. I don't care about anybody in the psychodrama. I don't care about the extras. I don't dabble with extras. I don't go out for diversion to the local pub to hang out with the extras. So I'm calling together those of you who are in her dreaming with me and who recognize that you are a character in her dreaming to do exactly the same. I am calling upon you to be selfish and to consider that your personal reality alone is where the proof of correction manifests, and that's all it takes. You're out of time for anything else. And the world at large, those who play their roles in the great psychodrama out there, even those who think they are awakening themselves and awakening the world to what's going on, they're just extras, and they're out of time as well, but they don't know it, and they probably never will. Such is the brutal truth that I bring to you in this recording, which is one of the last I'll be doing. So what am I going to be doing next? I'm going to be talking to people in direct physical contact with me, rather than recording from this room alone with a headset and sending out this archontic replication of my voice to the world. I continue to teach, and perhaps conversations that I have with people whom I meet face to face can be recorded and sent out, and you can listen to them. But I am changing the way I operate. I'm coming out of retreat, and from the beginning of September onward, for the remainder of my life, however long that may be, I intend to be in constant contact every day, in constant physical contact with people who come and go here, or to go where those people are, who will meet me, who are the actors, and to know themselves to be the actors. That's what I'm doing now. Now, I will add one qualification, and I would be a bad teacher if I had left this out. I completely give up any anticipation that the world situation can be turned around. I mean, can you imagine living on a planet with Hillary Clinton as President of the United States? Can you imagine the human devastation of the sacred innocence of the gender binary of the anthropos being destroyed in front of your eyes by transsexualism and the BTGB agenda forced by the humans? Can you imagine white genocide coming down to blood in the streets? I sorely wish that it would. Can you imagine it getting any worse? Nothing is going to turn this around. But there is one exception that I hold. I hold in my mind, in the narrative of my mind, in the planetary narrative of the social order, I hold one thread that I will not let go. And the name of that thread is Holocaust. If it is indeed possible to expose the Holocaust lie, and not merely expose it, it's been exposed. Any intelligent person who spends 6 days, 20 hours on the internet, studies and take notes, will come away with the certainty that the fraudulence of the Holocaust and the whole human agenda has been exposed in a way that will stand up in a court of law. I hold to this one shred, this one thread, were the Holocaust to be exposed and there to be a program of reparation implemented against the humans and all of their accessories to claim their assets and claim their money and put those funds and resources into independent civic trusts so that those funds could be redistributed into the community without the device of fiat currency, without the evil of interest. They could be, those funds, reclaimed from the financial criminals of the planet, from the financial mafia and the political mafia, could be redistributed in Europe, in the United States, to rebuild the countries as a massive act of reparation, there is more than enough money for everybody on this planet to be gainfully employed, for everybody on this planet to be fed, for fantastic and beautiful projects to be sponsored. If the Holocaust lie can be broken and turned around and reparation demanded, sought, and accomplished. That's the only thread that I hold in my hand regarding the possibility that correction could impact the social order. I don't abandon that. But otherwise, it's all talk, 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 and no action. And I too am guilty of that. I'm guilty of the self-indulgence of talk, 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 and no action. So I'm going into action. I'm going into Kalika action. I'm transmitting the Kalika instructions of Kala Tantra and the sexual technique to those who come to learn it. Nobody comes to me, no woman, no girl comes to me except in the story. No brother, no warrior comes to me except in the story. But that is the change I now enter. Direct contact and involvement with those who come to me and those to whom I go as I venture to move out a little from the retreat and isolation in which I have been embedded for about 13 years. So, okay, I trust with all that I've made it eminently clear about the shift I'm facing, the shift in the Nawal's life, the shift in the Turton's life right now. And in order for that shift to be registered in your mind, as if it were a plot detail in a riveting story, I want to remind you of the young man, the attendant in the lobby of the Astronomical Observatory. Remember, he was the one that had a moment of Anthropos looking with Caroline when she had her break open moment. And he, Alan is his name by the way, was living in the Hollywood Hills, near where I used to live, on Sycamore Avenue. He went home that evening, found this little cat, little white Persian cat, and he called her Isolde, because he was kind of a romantic young man, and very young. He was only like 20-something. And he had read Tristan and Isolde and really been moved by that story. He had had a number of troubled years since he came to LA on his own when he was about 16 and moved into a neighborhood where there were a lot of gay people and found himself to be the subject of a certain amount of aggression and pressure. He was not only facing pressure from predatory gay men, but he was also facing the whole Jewish-driven agenda of homosexuality, and his sexual identity was in question for a while, troubling for him because he knew in his heart that the gender binary is the true index of our humanity. And so at the time that he found this cat, he projected onto this pussy, if you don't mind the illusion, the wish that he would find his female counterpart. And he set his boundaries well, protected himself with strong boundaries so that he didn't succumb either to the individual predations of so-called gay men around him, nor did he succumb to the transsexual agenda, which is insidious upon this earth. And so he lived for a while with his cat there in his apartment, and while he was listening to the internet one day, he came across the NAV briefings, and he listened closely. He heard something he'd never heard before. He would sit there looking out on the canyon below Sycamore Avenue, looking down on the Geodesic Dome Theater, and sit there petting his cat, Isolde, and learning the narrative and learning the story. And he dreamed that he would find his counterpart someday, that he would find his woman, his mate, his tantrika. And indeed, one day, when Isolde was about 3.5 years old. Quite by chance, he met a girl of his age. He was 23 at that time. And she was Jewish, actually, but she was not a Sephardic Jew. She was an Ashkenazi Jew, and she didn't even look like a Jew. But her parents wanted her to consider herself to be a Jew because her mother had had a Jewish father. Well, this girl was also named Isolde because she was from a German Jewish family. And Isolde, the girl, got together with Alan and Isolde, the cat, and they joined their forces into a powerful romance framed within the Sophianic narrative. And because of her place in the Jewish world and her knowledge of that world, Isolde and Alan were able to unite with one single goal. They left the United States, they came to Europe, they went to Germany, and they together with Isolde the cat, formed the focus of the movement for reparation of the German people and overthrowing of the lie of the Holocaust. There are only 3 kinds of stories in the paramount setting of the earth: stories of love, stories of war, and stories of magic. So choose your stories wisely, and may the wisdom goddess guide your choice.